So I'm going to make a pine needle oil, a warming oil that's made with white pine needles, and I've just got a ton of them, but I'm going to do just a small batch just to show you how to do it. Basically what I do, and this is not totally what's necessary to do, but I take the white pine needles, that one I got to trim up, I only want, and I put them in a pan and just kind of, I'm doing this real quick, and I might turn my heat down just a little bit. This is a dry cast iron pan, and I'm just trying to release the oils. Oops, I'm trying to do a little bit better here than that. Normally I do a little better than that. But I'm just trying to release the oils and dry the needles out. They've been sitting for about 24 hours, but I'm just trying to dry them out a little bit more and release the oils from inside. You can kind of see the ones that get a little warm. You can see that the oils are being released. You don't want to go too much further than that, but they get a bit brighter of a green color, and oh, they smell good. And I'm just going to do this in batches, and then I'm going to take them over and put them into a food processor, and I'm going to grind them down to a little bit of dust. And I'm going to show you that in just a minute, but first I'm just going to do, I've got probably right around 2 cups, maybe 2 to 3 cups of pine needles is what I'm looking for. This may be more like 3 cups is what I'm looking for, so I'm just going to do these in batches and just in a dry. I know it looks oily, but that's because this is a very well used cast iron frying pan. So I'm just going to get these all toasted up, and I'm going to get them into the food processor, and I'll be right back. Okay, so we have this, we put our pine needles, our toasted pine needles, into a food processor, and food processors, blenders, things like that are not made for grinding up pine needles, so it does take a little bit of work to do this, but it's not that big, you know, it just takes a little extra time to do it. And then what I do is I have some dried cayenne that I got from the garden last year and dried them, and I'm going to put, some of them are broken, especially close to the top here, but I'm going to put in a few of them. This is to taste, if you're using it culinary. If you're using it for, I'm going to put one more nice size one in, and I try to get a few seeds into it and the flesh and things like that. If you have fresh cayenne, you might want to toast those along with your pine needles. As opposed to, these are dried though, so they're already ready to kind of just be ground up. And anyway, then I'm just going to grind these things up, and you can see I've already done one batch. I think I put in 2 cayenne into this one, and so I'm going to grind it up, and you can see we're not looking for it to get super fine. If it gets super fine, that's fine too, but I just want it so that there's more surface to the pine needles for the oil to work with. So I'm going to grind this up, but it's going to be too loud, so I'm going to turn you guys off for a second, and then I'll come back after I've ground this up. Okay, so you can see here, this is in a quart jar, and it is clean. It's just cloudy because at some point we canned something and we didn't put any vinegar into the water, the canning water. But this is 3 cups of pine needles that have been ground down. And that's the other reason. The 2 reasons that you want to grind these up is because by grinding them up, you open up more surface for the oil to work with, but it also makes the same amount of pine needles, which would have been a little over half, because 2 cups is a half and 3 cups would have been a little over half. You can put the same amount of, you can grind them up so they all fit down here, so you can use less oil. So you can put more pine needles into less oil, and that gives it a higher intense flavor. And I'm using cayenne pepper here. You can use, if you got habaneros, I would stick with the hot peppers, or the heat peppers, not the hot ones, but the heat peppers like habanero or, oh my goodness, I can't pull another pepper out of my head. Okay, well, stick with your heat peppers. That's what I would do, because what we're doing is we're making a warming oil. But you can also add nasturtium blossoms. In fact, sometimes when I make this for gifts, I add at the last minute before I give it out, I float some nasturtium blossoms, or I sink some nasturtium blossoms into the oil. That adds heat. Nasturtium blossoms, you use the pine and the horseradish, or pine and the nasturtiums, or pine and the peppers, or pine and ginger would be another one that you could try, and that would be a very oriental, for serving over with food, would be very oriental. This here is both culinary and medicinal. So I'm going to basically, I've got about a cup of oil here, and this cup of oil should come very close to covering all of these pine needles. And again, that's because we ground these pine needles up. And when you work with oil, you want to make sure that, for the most part, everything's, I'm going to get more out in just a minute, but I'm going to kind of tuck this down in. You want to make sure that everything is covered by the oil, that everything is coated in the oil and everything like that. Because if you've got if you've got one long pine needle that didn't get ground up and it sticks out and goes against the glass, that can form what is often referred to as a science experiment. Or it can, it can start growing mold, basically. And if you think you need a little more, add a little more. Again, the less oil to the pine needles you got, the more intense the flavor is going to be. So that's what I'm going with the minimum amount of oil. I think I'm going to put just a little bit more in, and basically I didn't scrape my measuring cup, so I'm thinking that's what I'll do. And then we're going to let this set for a long time, or for a while. The longer you let it set, the stronger the flavors are going to be, but also the more chance you have of molding to occur. So you can start using this within 2 hours for flavoring. You can start using it 8 hours to 12 hours for a medicinal. I wouldn't let it set much longer than, I would keep a very close eye on it if I was letting it set for anything longer than 2 days. If you're going to let it set for 3 days, keep an eye, and if you see one hint of mold on it, quickly clean that out and you're done. So about 2 days is what I recommend having it set, and then strain out the plant material. And it's warming just for consuming it on your food. Put a little bit on your fish or on your chicken, and it helps warm your body up internally. Just with these two things, these two things, pine and the cayenne pepper. And the other thing that it does is, if you take it, like say you get chillblanes on your feet or your hands from being out in the cold too much, you can take this oil and rub it onto your hands after it's sat for a little bit, and it'll help get the blood flow back to your fingertips, to your toes. If you have an area of your body that has had frostbite before, sometimes it doesn't take too much of being out in the cold to start feeling the pain, and then you can rub this onto it. It's not really good for frostbite, because you don't want the blood coming really fast to frostbite. You want the blood to come back, but not super fast. So I wouldn't use it on frostbite or on broken skin, because peppers can burn, but it's more for helping to get the circulation going back into your skin. This is one of my oils. I'm going to put just a little bit more oil into it, and I'm going to probably do it by scraping the bottom of this and get the last of the oil out. If I still don't think it's enough, I'll add just a little bit more. But this is about, I'd say again, about 3 cups of pine needles toasted and ground up in a food processor, about 1 cup, maybe a little bit more of oil, and this is probably about 5, maybe 6 dried cayenne peppers. If you're using fresh cayenne, I would probably toast them up while I was toasting the pine needles. You can also add salt to this. Salt would probably make this last longer as a preservative. I'm just not fond of the flavor of salt. I use it as sparingly as possible. So anyway, this is pine needle and white pine needle and cayenne pepper oil, both culinary and medicinal. So put our warming oil up like this, and I can show you this is our warming oil. It actually is warm because I got a little drop on my hand, and I can definitely feel the warming on that area. Pine seems to allow a deeper penetration of the warming, and then of course the peppers are with the capsaicin are good for warming. This would make a nice gel, or a nice rub for sore muscles just as well as for warming. The other thing that you can do with this is, if you want, you don't need to leave it as an oil. You can melt some beeswax and turn it into more of a balm, like a tiger balm. And if you've been out and it's been really cold, it's nice to come in, put this on, rub this on your feet, and put a nice pair of clean cotton socks onto your feet, and it just helps bring the circulation back to your feet. But white pine and cayenne pepper oil, great for warming, and it's a sweet heat. If you pour it over fish or chicken, it's a nice sweet heat to eat. It's totally edible. It's 3 ingredients: olive oil, cayenne pepper, and white pine, and all 3 of those are very good for you. So it makes for a nice flavored oil.